The school pickup line is where it happens. Nadia Reeves is standing outside Roosevelt Elementary at 3:15 p.m. on a Tuesday, holding a juice box for her 7-year-old son Marcus, when two men in a black SUV pull up beside her and tell her to get in. She doesn't get in. So the one in the passenger seat steps out large, unhurried, wearing a suit that costs more than her monthly rent, and hands her a manila folder. Inside is a photograph of her at a warehouse loading dock 18 months ago, a falsified invoice with her name on it, and a single typed note that reads, accessory to money laundering, 10 to 15 years. Marcus goes to the state. Nadia's hands go cold. She knows whose name is behind this without being told. She worked as a bookkeeper for Harlan Cross's legitimate real estate front for 2 years before she quit, before she figured out what the numbers actually meant, before she took her son and her conscience and walked away. She thought walking away was enough. The man in the suit says, Mr. Cross wants the ledger you kept. You have 72 hours. The school bell rings. Marcus comes running out with a painting he made, a house with a sun above it and two figures out front. Nadia takes the painting with steady hands and walks her son to the car. She does not let him see her face until she is behind the wheel. Then, for exactly 45 seconds, she allows herself to fall apart. Then she stops. Marcus is in the backseat asking if they can have pizza. She says yes. She starts the car. She starts thinking. Nadia does have the ledger. She kept a personal copy, not to use as a weapon, but because she was afraid no one would believe her without proof. It lives on an encrypted USB drive inside a hollowed-out novel on the third shelf of her apartment bookcase, behind Marcus's school reading awards. The ledger contains 18 months of real numbers, the actual flow of money through Harlan Cross's real estate operations, coded in a system Nadia herself designed before she understood what it was coding. It documents shell company transfers, cash deposits disguised as rental income, and payments to city officials that were logged as consulting fees. It is in the hands of the right person, the kind of evidence that ends careers, closes empires, and puts men like Harlan Cross exactly where they belong. The problem is that Nadia is in it too. Her name is on documents. Her signature is on filings she processed in good faith. If she walks into a police station, she doesn't know if she walks out. She sits at her kitchen table after Marcus goes to sleep and stares at the USB drive for a very long time. Then she opens her laptop and types one name into the search bar, Claire Weston, federal prosecutor. Claire Weston has been building a case against Harlan Cross for 3 years. Nadia finds this out through 6 hours of careful research, court records, news archives, a law journal article about organized crime prosecution that quotes Claire by name, and a 2-year-old interview in a legal trade magazine where Claire says, the biggest obstacle in financial crime prosecution is finding the person inside the operation who kept the real numbers. Nadia reads that sentence 4 times. She is that person. She kept the real numbers. She also finds something else during her search, a sealed civil case filed 2 years ago by a former Cross employee that was quietly dismissed. The plaintiff's name is redacted. The law firm that got it dismissed is the most expensive one in the city, and it is on permanent retainer for Harlan Cross. Someone else tried before her and they were crushed. Nadia closes her laptop. She checks on Marcus. She goes back to the table. She is not going to be crushed, but she needs help she cannot yet afford and a plan she hasn't fully formed. She has 68 hours left. Nadia has one person in her life who knows the whole truth, her older sister, B, who lives 2 states away and has been telling Nadia to run since the day she quit the Cross organization. Nadia calls her at midnight. B picks up on the second ring because B has been half waiting for this call for 18 months. Nadia tells her everything, the parking lot, the folder, the 72 hours Marcus. B is silent for a long moment. Then she says, I know someone. Someone is a retired FBI financial crimes analyst named George Tanaka who now consults for a nonprofit legal defense organization. B met him at a community meeting 2 years ago. She has his number. She has been holding it like a spare key she hoped Nadia would never need. She gives it to Nadia now. Nadia writes it down on the back of Marcus's Sun-End house painting because it is the only paper on the table. When she hangs up, she holds the painting for a moment. Then she dials. George picks up at 7 a.m. the next morning because Nadia calls then instead of midnight because she doesn't want to seem desperate even though she absolutely is. He is 63, unhurried, and has the voice of a man who has heard worse and helped anyway. She gives him the overview in 10 minutes. He asks 3 questions. Is the ledger complete? Is it time-stamped? Is it in her possession? Yes, yes, and yes. He is quiet for 4 seconds, then he says, don't give it to Cross. Don't go to local police and don't talk to anyone at your old workplace. He says he needs 24 hours to make a call. She says she has 44 hours left. He says, then I'll use 22. He hangs up. Nadia drops Marcus at school with a packed lunch and a tight hug that lasts 3 seconds longer than usual. Marcus says, Mom, you're squishing me. She lets go. She watches him walk through the school door. Then she drives home and sits by the window where she can see the street. Harlan Cross is 55, silver-haired, and appears on the cover of a regional business magazine twice a year. He runs 4 legitimate-facing companies, funds a children's hospital wing, and has dinner with the mayor every quarter. He's also the kind of man who built his empire by ensuring that every person who touched his real operations had something to lose. Nadia was careful, she thought. She left quietly, signed a vague exit agreement, and took nothing she wasn't supposed to take. But Harlan has a man whose only job is to audit who knew what and when, and 18 months after Nadia left, that man flagged her. The letter she designed is the one piece of his operation that exists in a form a prosecutor could actually follow. Harlan knows this. He does not want her in prison. Prison creates trials, and trials create discovery. He wants the ledger. He wants her silent. The 72-hour threat is a pressure tactic, not a real legal move. But Nadia doesn't know that. Or rather, she is beginning to suspect it, and her suspicion is more dangerous to Harlan than her fear would have been. George calls back in 19 hours. He has spoken to Claire Weston's office. Not Claire directly, her deputy, a younger prosecutor named Alan Park, who has been on the Cross investigation for 14 months and whose entire case currently has one significant hole: documentary proof of the internal money flow. Alan wants to meet Nadia. George explains what a proffer session is: a protected conversation where Nadia can share information without it being used against her, in exchange for the possibility of full immunity. He explains the risks plainly. It is not a guarantee, it is a negotiation, and she needs her own attorney in the room. He knows one, a woman named Fatima Os, who does exactly this kind of work, and who will take the case on deferred payment because Fatima has been waiting for a Cross case for 2 years. Nadia agrees to the meeting. It is scheduled for 10 a.m. the following morning, 4 hours before the 72-hour deadline expires. She tells no one except B. That night she makes Marcus his favorite dinner and helps him with his reading homework, and when he falls asleep she sits on the edge of his bed and makes him a promise he cannot hear. "I'm going to make sure you never have to be afraid because of something I did." The meeting is in a federal building conference room: beige walls, fluorescent lights, a table that has held 1,000 hard conversations. Nadia sits with Fatima on one side and George on the other. Alan Park is across from them with a colleague. Claire Weston is not in the room. Nadia notices this and Fatima catches her noticing and gives her a small nod that says, "That's fine, this is how it starts." Nadia speaks for 90 minutes. She explains the ledger system, how she built it, what the codes mean, how to trace each transaction to its real source. Alan Park's colleague stops writing notes after 15 minutes and starts recording instead, which means what she is saying is more valuable than they expected. At the end, Alan slides a document across the table. Fatima reads it for 12 minutes. Then she looks at Nadia and says, "Full immunity, no charges," in writing. Nadia signs. Her hand is completely steady. She is 29 years old and she has just put the weight of everything on the table and felt the table hold. Harlan's man calls Nadia's cell at exactly the 72-hour mark. She lets it go to voicemail. He leaves a message that is professional and cold and implies things without saying them directly because these people are always careful about recorded lines. Nadia listens to the message once, then forwards it to Fatima. Fatima forwards it to Alan Park. Alan flags it as attempted witness intimidation, which is a federal offense, which means Harlan Cross is now added to his own case file without knowing it. Nadia does not call back. She picks up Marcus from school. She takes him to the park. She watches him on the swings, his face open and happy, the sun low and orange in the sky, and she breathes in a way she hasn't breathed in 3 days. But she knows the quiet won't last. Harlan Cross does not stop when people don't respond. He escalates. She needs to be ready before he does. 2 days later, Nadia's landlord calls to tell her that her lease is being terminated due to a zoning review of the building. She knows immediately that this is not about zoning. The building has been there for 40 years. Cross owns a property management company that holds debt on 3 buildings in this area of the city. She calls Fatima. Fatima calls Alan. Alan's team begins pulling the property records within the hour. Meanwhile, Nadia calls her landlord back, a kind older man named Mr. Petrov who sounds genuinely embarrassed, and asks him directly, "Who pressured you?" He is quiet for a long moment. Then he says, "I'm sorry, Nadia, I'm very sorry." She thanks him. She starts looking for a new apartment that same afternoon. She finds one in a building that has no connection to any Cross property. She does not tell anyone outside her immediate circle where it is. She is learning to move the way people who are being watched have to move, quietly, quickly, leaving no pattern. Children know. Nadia has been careful, but Marcus is 7 and sharp-eyed and has his mother's instinct for when the air changes. At breakfast he asks, "Are we moving?" She says maybe, she's looking at some option. He asks, "Is it because of the bad men?" She goes very still. She asks him carefully what he means. He says one of the men from the black car was standing outside his school yesterday, just standing, not doing anything, just there. Nadia gets Marcus to school through a different route and calls Fatima before she reaches the parking lot. This is no longer property pressure. This is a child being used as a message. Alan Park has Harlan Cross's surveillance team under federal observation by end of day. A quiet protective detail is placed near Marcus's school, unmarked, low profile, but there. Nadia doesn't tell Marcus about the detail. She tells him, "Some grown-ups are trying to scare us to make us be quiet." "But we're not going to be quiet, okay?" Marcus looks at her for a moment, then he says, "Like in my book when the dragon tries to scare the village but the village doesn't run," she says, "exactly like that." He nods seriously and goes to class. George Tanaka calls Nadia with something he has uncovered through his own network of former federal contacts. There is someone inside Harlan Cross's organization who has been quietly feeding information to a financial journalist for 8 months. Not to prosecutors, to a journalist. The journalist has not yet published anything, presumably because the source hasn't given them enough to be bulletproof. George thinks he knows who the source is. A mid-level accountant named Peter Lim who left Cross's company 14 months ago, 2 months before Nadia did, and who has been living very quietly in a different city ever since. If Peter has documents that complement Nadia's ledger, their combined evidence becomes something even harder to dismantle in court. Nadia asks George, "Can we reach him?" George says, "I already did. He wants to talk, but he's afraid." Nadia says, "Tell him I'm afraid too. Tell him I did it anyway." Peter is 34, soft-spoken, and has spent 14 months waiting to see if the ground would collapse under him. He video calls Nadia and George together. He has a folder, not a ledger, but a series of communications. Internal emails discussing how to route cash payments, text message screenshots between Harlan's operations manager and a city building inspector, and one document that neither Nadia nor George expected, a payment record showing a direct transfer to the chief of a local police precinct, labeled as a security consulting contract. Nadia stares at the screen. The police payment explains something that had been worrying her. While a local police report would be a dangerous first call, she was right not to go there. Peter sends his documents to Fatima encrypted that same evening. Alan Park calls Nadia the next morning. His voice is controlled, but she can hear the energy underneath it. He says, "We're moving faster than planned." She asks what that means. He says, "It means be careful. When people like Cross feel the ground move, they react hard." Harlan's reaction comes through his lawyers first. A cease and desist letter delivered to Fatima's office alleging that Nadia stole proprietary financial documents during her employment. It is a legal counterpunch, technically groundless given the immunity agreement but designed to create noise and delay and to signal, "We are not done." Then it comes personally. Harlan Cross calls Nadia directly from a number she doesn't recognize. She answers because she doesn't recognize it. He speaks for the first time. His voice is smooth, almost warm, the voice of a man who built a career on sounding reasonable. He says, "Nadia, this has gone further than it needs to. Think about your son." She says, "I am thinking about my son, that's why I'm doing this." He pauses, just slightly. She thinks it is the first time in a long time that someone has said something to Harlan Cross that he did not script in advance. She hangs up. She calls Fatima and reports the call. Fatima notes the time and adds it to the file. The file is growing heavy. Claire Weston calls Fatima and requests a direct meeting with Nadia. Not her deputy, Claire herself. They meet in the same beige conference room, but the energy is different now. More people, more documents on the table, a quiet intensity that feels like something approaching a finish line even though Nadia knows it isn't one yet. Claire is 51, direct, and wastes no words. She tells Nadia that the combined evidence, the ledger, Peter's documents, the recorded intimidation call, the voicemail, and 3 additional items her own team has gathered in parallel, is enough to seek an indictment. She says the investigation is moving to the grand jury phase. She looks at Nadia and says, "You did the hard part. You came forward when it cost you something." Nadia says, "I came forward because he threatened to take my son." Claire says, "That's what courage usually looks like. Not the absence of fear, just the decision to move anyway." Nadia nods. She doesn't cry in the conference room. She waits until she is in the elevator. Then she lets herself have 30 seconds. Then the doors open and she walks out. Alan Park comes to Fatima with a discovery from the grand jury preparation that changes the shape of everything. The falsified invoice that Harlan's men showed Nadia in the parking lot, the one with her name on it, the one designed to make her feel implicated, was created 11 days ago, not 18 months ago. The date was fabricated. The invoice is entirely fraudulent. Nadia's name was placed on a document that never existed during her employment. This means the threat was a complete fabrication. She was never actually legally exposed. They manufactured her vulnerability to control her. Fatima explains this to Nadia carefully. Nadia is quiet for a long time, then she says, "He invented evidence against me to force me to give him the real evidence." Fatima says, "Yes," Nadia says, "and the real evidence destroys him." Fatima says, "Yes." Something moves across Nadia's face, not satisfaction exactly. Something more complete than that. The anger she has been managing carefully for 2 weeks settles into something solid and clear. She says, "Okay, what do we do next?" Peter Lim has been sitting on something he wasn't sure was relevant. He sends it now because the ground is moving and he wants it in the right hands before anything shifts. It is a second-hand account, a conversation he witnessed between Harlan Cross and his operations manager 3 years ago, which Peter wrote down afterward in a personal journal and kept. The conversation references 2 city council members by name. describes a specific zoning vote that was purchased, and mentions a figure, a woman described only as the one who knows where the bodies aren't but where the money is, who Harlan considered his greatest internal risk. The woman is not named, but the timeline matches Nadia's employment exactly. Harlan Cross was afraid of Nadia before she even knew she had a reason to be afraid of him. He saw her clearly before she saw herself. Peter's journal is submitted to the grand jury. Nadia reads the relevant section in Fatima's office. She thinks about the 7-year-old in the backseat with the pizza request and the painting and the dragon story. She thinks, he was afraid of me, he just made sure I didn't know it. Someone inside the investigation leaks to a journalist, not Claire's team, not Fatima, but somewhere in the chain, that a grand jury has been seated in connection with Harlan Cross's business operations. The story runs without specifics but with enough that Harlan's lawyers are in emergency session within the hour. The city feels it. 3 of Harlan's business partners issue quiet statements distancing themselves from his real estate holdings. 2 city officials who appear in Peter's documents take sudden unplanned vacations. The police precinct chief who received the consulting contract payment requests a meeting with an internal affairs officer, apparently deciding very suddenly that cooperation is the better geometry. Nadia reads the news on her phone in the new apartment, smaller than the old one, unfamiliar, full of Marcus's shoes and drawings already taking over every surface, and she thinks about how fear moves. How it flowed from Harlan to her in a parking lot, how it is now flowing back. Harlan's lead attorney contacts Fatima with an offer. Harlan will surrender his real estate portfolio, step down from his charitable foundation, and accept a civil settlement if the criminal investigation is suspended. Fatima takes the offer to Alan and Claire. Claire's answer takes 4 minutes. No, the crimes documented are not civil matters. The intimidation of a witness, a single mother with a 7-year-old, is not a line item to be settled. The falsified evidence manufactured against Nadia is its own criminal act. Claire sends back a formal declination, then she calls Nadia personally to tell her. Nadia asks, "Is it over?" Claire says, "The offer part is over, the hard part is just starting. Grand jury, indictment, arraignment, trial, it'll be months, possibly a year." Nadia says, "I have time." Claire says, "You have more than that, you have the receipts." Nadia almost smiles. Marcus knows more than Nadia has told him because he is 7 and reads faces and has been listening to the shape of phone calls even when he couldn't hear the words. One evening after dinner he asks, "Mom, are you in trouble?" She sits down at his level. She says, "I was close to trouble, but I made the right choices and now I'm helping the right people fix something that was wrong." He thinks about this. Then he asks, "Did the bad man do bad things to other people too?" She says, "Yes." He is quiet. Then, "Did you help them too?" She realizes, sitting there on the kitchen floor with her son, that she didn't fully think of it that way. The ledger, the evidence, the case, she thought of it as survival, as protecting Marcus. But the 2 city officials, the diverted money, the unnamed sealed plaintiff who tried before her, there are other people whose lives were bent by Harlan Cross's weight. She says, "I think so, I hope so." Marcus nods like that settles it. "Good," he says, and goes to find his book. She stays on the kitchen floor a moment longer, just breathing. Harlan Cross is indicted on 11 counts including money laundering, bribery of public officials, obstruction of justice, and fabrication of evidence. The indictment is unsealed on a Wednesday morning. Nadia is not in the courtroom, she is at Marcus's school helping with a reading fair because she decided weeks ago that if this day came she wanted to be doing something ordinary and good when it happened. Fatima texts her 2 words, "It's done." Nadia is holding a stack of children's books when the text arrives. She sets the books down carefully. A teacher nearby asks if she's okay. She says, "Yes, I just got some good news." She picks the books back up. She helps 4 children find stories they want to read. She does not look at her phone again until lunch. Then she calls B, who cries enough for both of them. The previously sealed civil case, the one Nadia found in her research, the one that was quietly crushed 2 years ago, is unsealed as part of the discovery process. The plaintiff's name is revealed. Nadia Reeves, a former operations coordinator at one of Cross's companies, who documented financial irregularities and was subsequently fired, sued for breach of contract, and subjected to a harassment campaign that ended her career in the industry. Nadia is 44 and has been living carefully and quietly ever since. Fatima reaches out to her. Nadia, who has spent 2 years believing she failed and lost, learns that her original case, the documents she filed, the record she preserved, is now part of a federal indictment. She didn't fail, she was crushed by a machine that was afraid of her. She and Nadia speak on the phone for the first time and talk for an hour and a half. At the end, Nadia says, "I thought I was the only one." Nadia says, "So did I." The trial of Harlan Cross opens to significant public attention. Nadia is a listed witness. Walking into that building, not the beige conference room this time, but the actual federal courthouse with its stone steps and its crowd of cameras and its weight of something real, is the hardest physical thing she has ever done. Fatima is beside her. George is behind her. B flew in the night before and is sitting 3 rows back in the gallery. Marcus is at school. On the stand, Nadia speaks for 2.5 hours. She explains the ledger system in language that is clear, precise, and impossible to dismiss. Harlan's defense attorney is skilled and aggressive and works hard to imply that she built the system knowingly, that she was complicit. Nadia answers every question without flinching. When the defense attorney says, "You designed a system that facilitated financial crimes," Nadia says, "I designed a bookkeeping system for what I was told was a real estate business. When I understood what it was actually tracking, I left, and then I was threatened with prison for leaving, so I brought you the evidence." The courtroom is very quiet after that. Guilty on 9 of the 11 counts, including money laundering, bribery, and fabrication of evidence. 2 counts are dismissed on procedural grounds that don't affect the sentence. The forewoman reads the verdict on a Thursday afternoon. Nadia is in the courthouse but not in the room. She is in a waiting area with Fatima, and she hears about it through the door, through the change in sound, through Fatima's phone vibrating and Fatima's face opening into something real and tired and relieved. Nadia Reeves is in the gallery. She sends Nadia a text that is just 3 words: "We did it." Nadia shows the text to Fatima. Harlan Cross is taken into custody. The silver-haired man who appeared on magazine covers and had dinner with the mayor is led out of a courtroom in handcuffs, and whatever story he told about himself for 55 years ends there in that room, because one bookkeeper kept the real numbers and had the courage to bring them forward. Sentencing is set for 60 days out. Nadia goes home and makes Marcus dinner. He asks how her day was. She says, "Really good." He says, "Good good or regular good?" She says, "Life-changing good." He seems satisfied with this and asks for more rice. 6 months after the verdict, Nadia Reeves is working at the nonprofit legal defense organization that George Tanaka introduced her to, not as a client now, but as a financial analyst. She builds transparent ledger systems for organizations that want to ensure their books are clean and accountable. It turns out that being the person who built a system that documented a crime makes you very good at building systems that prevent them. Nadia Reeves has filed a formal complaint with the State Labor Board and received a settlement that returns some measure of what she lost. She's building something new, a consulting firm, careful and small, on her own terms. The police precinct chief who accepted Harlan's payments resigned and is under separate investigation. 2 city council members accepted plea deals. The Moreno Community Initiative, the charitable foundation Harlan used as a public face, has been dissolved. And its remaining legitimate assets have been transferred to 3 actual community organizations in the districts it claimed to serve. Rosa, no, that was a different story. Here, it is the Women's Reentry Program in the East End that receives an unexpected grant and does not know it came from the restructured assets of the man who once listed them in his files as a line he could exploit. Marcus turns 8 in the spring. At his birthday party, small, loud, full of second graders, he shows everyone the painting he made a year ago, the one with the house and the sun and the 2 figures. He has added something to it since then. A third figure, smaller and above all 3 of them, in yellow crayon, not just a sun but a sun with rays going in every direction, like something that cannot be contained. Nadia looks at the painting on the wall of the new apartment, her lease, her name, and thinks about the parking lot, the folder, the cold hands, the 45 seconds she allowed herself before she started the car and started thinking. She thinks every single second after that was mine. The party is loud and bright around her. Marcus is laughing. The window is open. The sun is doing what it does. She is not afraid anymore.